Good afternoon and welcome to Euronews Now. It's Monday the 6th of December. These are your top stories this hour. A new raft of COVID-19 measures come into force across Europe this week, including in Ireland, where mandatory tests are now required for entry. Ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi has been sentenced to 4 years in jail for incitement, the first in a series of verdicts. Rescuers are searching for survivors in Indonesia after Mount Semeru erupted on Java Island, killing at least 14 people and injuring many more.
This week sees several countries imposing new anti-COVID measures ranging from lockdowns for the unvaccinated to travel restrictions. On Sunday, Dublin began obliging all passengers arriving in Ireland to show proof of a negative coronavirus test result. Once in the country, a further test is required. It's all part of a raft of new restrictions, including shutting nightclubs due to the emergence of the new Omicron variant. Switzerland has done a U-turn on an initial call for people arriving to enter quarantine, replacing it with further testing. And from today, COVID certificates will be required and face masks will have to be worn in a wider list of situations. Meanwhile, from Tuesday morning, the UK will also insist that anyone heading its way must have a negative pre-departure COVID test in order to enter the country. They will also need to take a PCR test before the end of their second day in the UK and have to self-isolate at least until their negative result comes back. While in France, the government is set to hold a special meeting today to see if it's necessary to take additional measures. But not everyone agrees with the restrictions. On Sunday, Denmark became the latest country to see protests. Hundreds marched through the streets of the capital, Copenhagen, to show their anger at the health restrictions. The government has reintroduced mandatory face coverings in some places and on public transport, and is offering vaccines to children between 5 and 11 years old. Earlier in the Belgian capital, police had used tear gas and water cannon on protesters when thousands turned out trying to march up to the headquarters of the European Union. A line of riot police prevented them from getting there.
A court in Myanmar has sentenced the country's ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi to 4 years in prison after finding her guilty of incitement and violating coronavirus restrictions. The ruling is the first in a series of cases brought against her since the army seized power at the beginning of February, blocking her National League for Democracy party from starting a second term in office. Shortly before the court delivered its first verdict against her, a small group of people staged a rare protest against Myanmar's military rulers. The group of around 15 young people came together suddenly in a street in Yangon, holding flares and signs that called their protest anti-fascist action.
Well, for more on that, I'm joined by Phil Robertson. He's the Deputy Director of the Asia Division of Human Rights Watch. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme today. So what is likely to happen next? Will Aung San Suu Kyi end up going to prison, given that she's already on house arrest?
Well, I think she will definitely go to prison. The question is, what sort of prison? Will it be a formal prison, or will she be left in house arrest in some house in some remote corner of the capital, Naypyidaw? We simply don't know where she's going to be sent, but I think that it's quite clear this will be the first of many sentences that she's going to receive, because the military junta in Myanmar is really piling it on her. There's multiple charges, even more severe than these ones, which have been brought against her and which she's being tried for. And I expect that it's going to be the same kind of outcome, that, you know, these are politically motivated trials in front of a compromised lapdog judiciary that does what the military wants, and they are going to sentence her to many years in prison.
What sort of charges is she looking at then, the other charges you mentioned?
Oh, she's got other charges regarding incitement. She's got other charges regarding other sort of so-called political crimes. there's election fraud, there's corruption. There's a whole slew of things that are being brought against her that I think will, are really determined to keep her in detention for the rest of her life. I mean, they do not want her free to challenge them politically, and they're using the court system to put her away indefinitely.
So this is effectively the end of, or could be effectively the end of Aung San Suu Kyi's political career. And of course, what does this mean for the democracy movement in Myanmar?
Well, this is really going to be up to the Myanmar people. I think the Myanmar people are going to be quite angry about this. They will redouble their efforts. The resistance will become even more determined because they see her as their legitimately elected leader. And, she did win the November 2020 election along with the National League for Democracy that she leads. There's no doubt about that. So her political fate is really going to be now tied very closely to the fate of the protesters in the streets and their movement to get rid of the military.
What have we heard so far from the international community about the sentence, and what can they do?
Well, the international community will certainly bring out many statements of denunciation, calling this a political trial, calling this a kangaroo court, saying all the things that are absolutely correct in terms of, a judicial system and a political system that frankly doesn't function, that is under the thumb of the military. But what they need to do is they need to impose a global arms embargo. They need to sanction oil and gas revenues and other revenues that are really critical for the junta to continue to operate. And they need to put pressure on the UN Security Council to refer the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court, because crimes against humanity are being committed against the people day in, day out in Myanmar. And it's time for action.
The trial of Ghislaine Maxwell on child sex trafficking charges continues in Manhattan, with the court hearing another week of testimonies. The 59-year-old daughter of the late British publishing baron Robert Maxwell was arrested in July 2020 in New Hampshire for her alleged role in Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse of minor girls as young as 14. She has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Our reporter Susan Tarani sent us an update from outside the federal court in New York.
The second week of the sex abuse trial of Ghislaine Maxwell starts in New York on Monday as 3 more main accusers are ready to testify against the 59-year-old British socialite. Maxwell is accused of recruiting minors to be sexually abused by financier Jeffrey Epstein. She faces several charges of felony counts as well as trafficking minors, and if convicted could face up to 80 years behind bars. So far, the prosecution has argued that Maxwell was Epstein's partner in crime, while the defense says she's being made a scapegoat. Moving forward, prosecution plans on introducing flight logs, which they say will confirm that Epstein, Maxwell, and alleged victims traveled together, as well as FedEx records, which will confirm Epstein sent one victim gifts when she was as young as 15 years old. The trial is expected to last another 5 weeks. Susan Tarani reporting from New York for Euronews.
Rescuers are searching for survivors amid the smouldering debris and thick mud after the sudden eruption of Indonesia's Mount Semeru on Java Island on Saturday. The volcano spewed thick columns of ash more than 12,000 metres into the sky, then buried villages and farmland in the area. At least 14 people are known to have died and many more have been injured. Search and rescue efforts have been hampered by heavy rains, creating tons of mud, swamping homes and destroying roads. The country's National Disaster Mitigation Agency spokesperson said that 56 people have been hospitalised, mostly with burns. Emergency shelters have been set up for more than 1,300 people after they fled their homes, but the government is organising a massive evacuation of the area. Mount Semeru has erupted many times over the last 200 years and is one of 129 volcanoes which the authorities keep under watch in Indonesia. More than 62,000 people call Semeru's fertile slopes home. It last erupted in January with no casualties.
Pope Francis wrapped up his three-day visit to Greece on Monday with a celebration mass for some 2,000 faithful in Athens. During the ceremony, he urged respect for the small and lowly and also encouraged people to remain hopeful. He also warned during his stay that the Mediterranean is becoming a grim cemetery without tombstones and that after all this time, little in the world has changed with regard to the issue of migration. He also said that the root causes should be confronted. It comes as some 1,559 people have died or gone missing attempting the perilous Mediterranean crossing this year, according to figures from the International Organization for Migration. The Pope also visited asylum seekers on the island of Lesbos, where he called the neglect of migrants the shipwreck of civilization.
Let us not let our sea be transformed into a desolate sea of death. Let us not allow this place of encounter to become a theatre of conflict. Let us not permit this sea of memories to be transformed into a sea of forgetfulness. Brothers and sisters, please, let us stop this shipwreck of civilization.
On the island of Lesbos, the Pope also met with refugees and migrants in a moving show of solidarity, together with leaders of the Greek Orthodox Church and Greece's president and authorities.
On Monday, Austria will have a new chancellor, Karl Nehammer. Nehammer has been interior minister since January 2020. The 49-year-old long-time professional soldier and lieutenant is considered a hardliner, consistently defending Sebastian Kurz's tough stance on refugee policy. On Twitter, he endorsed Denmark's restrictive stance on migration, tweeting after a meeting with the Danish migration minister, "Denmark is an ally of Austria when it comes to fighting illegal migration." Nehammer studied political communication and is considered well connected in the Austrian People's Party. After the terrorist attack in Vienna on the 2nd of November 2020, Nehammer was blamed for failures of the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution and Counter-Terrorism, which reported to him as head of the Interior Ministry. 4 people were killed and 23 injured. Nehammer admitted mistakes by his authorities. Everyone has certainly worked to the best of their ability, he said. But the fact is that the terrorists managed to fool the justice system's de-radicalization program, to fool the people in it and get an early release through this. Nehammer takes over Austria in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, but says he's looking forward to the new task. He was already responsible for various lockdowns as Interior Minister.
It is Austria's 6th Chancellor in 6 years who is sworn in today in Vienna. Karl Nehammer, the previous Minister of the Interior, replaces Alexander Schallenberg, who was in office for barely 2 months. This renewed change of Chancellor was triggered by the now final political withdrawal of Sebastian Kurz. New Chancellor Karl Nehammer is considered a hardliner. The 49-year-old Viennese is a trained professional soldier and constantly engages in anti-migration rhetoric. Ensuring security in the country is also a major concern for the conservative politician of the Austrian People's Party. No policy reversal is to be expected with him on Austria's anti-COVID measures. With a full lockdown and the announced vaccine mandate, the Alpine Republic is currently pursuing one of the toughest approaches in Europe. And while the recently registered record infection numbers have now been cut in half, resentment among the population is growing at the same time. Once again, more than 40,000 opponents of the measures took to the streets in Vienna this weekend. 5 police officers were injured during clashes with demonstrators. And whether the frequent change of chancellor is the best tactic against the ever-growing division in Austrian society remains to be seen. Johannes Bleschberger, Euronews, Vienna.
3 skiers have been killed and 2 injured in an avalanche in central Austria. The victims were part of a group of 11 skiers, 8 of whom were hit by a roughly 200-metre wide slab of snow as they ascended a slope during a ski tour in Salzburg province. 3 of the skiers were buried by the avalanche but were rescued, while another 2 were partly buried and able to free themselves. The NGO Sea-Watch and an art collective have placed some 300 life jackets on the steps of the Bundestag in Berlin. It's a symbolic representation of the fate of migrants who've died at sea while trying to enter the European Union. It's part of a campaign to get Germany's new federal government to decriminalise migration and to create safe escape routes to Germany and Europe. Poland's annual contest to find the most beautiful nativity crib has taken place in Krakow. This year there were 106 entrants. Each one must be made of paper or cardboard, and they must reflect elements of the city's architecture and traditions, and of course portray a nativity scene. 3 years ago the Krakow cribs were recognised by UNESCO as a cultural treasure.
Españoles, hemos votado en el día de ayer la Constitución.
Este es Ana María. Ana María
Rival demonstrations have been held in France, with opponents and supporters of TV pundit turned presidential candidate Eric Zemmour taken to the streets as he held his first campaign meeting. Zemmour has rocked the French political establishment with his overtly nationalistic and anti-immigration rhetoric, and he doubled down on that stance in front of his supporters on Sunday. In the capital, Paris, more than 2,000 people gathered to hear leftist candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon denounce the far right and its domination of the French political agenda. We are here to proclaim once again, he said, that no, France isn't the far right. France is about social security, public health, emancipation, schools and research.
La droite républicaine est de retour.
On Saturday, the head of the Paris region, Valérie Pécresse, won the contest to become the presidential candidate for the mainstream right Republican Party.
Thanks for watching the programme. Stay tuned for more top stories or check out our website, that's euronews.com.